This is That Movie Nerd here, and I'm here with Sylvester McCoy. And Sylvester McCoy was the seventh Doctor Who, as well as Radagast the Brown in the Hobbit trilogy. And you guys know how big I am on the Hobbit and the Middle-earth movies, so this is actually pretty exciting for me to talk with Mr. McCoy here. So the first question I have is, how did you get the role of Radagast? What was the screening process? I know Peter Jackson's a big Doctor Who fan, so did that factor into it at all?
Well, actually, you have to go back 12 years earlier, because I was up for Bilbo Baggins in Lord of the Rings. And there was a bunch of us at the beginning. It took about a year, and then they whittled away, and it ended up with just two, myself and some other person who I didn't know who it was going to be, and it turned out to be the great and wonderful Ian Holm. So he got the gig, and I didn't. But they obviously found me interesting. If they'd gone the other way, I might have. So when it came to The Hobbit, he remembered me. But in between times, I toured the world with the Royal Shakespeare Company in a play called King Lear with a very tall actor called Ian McKellen. You might have heard of him.
Yeah, I think I know him.
And he gave me neck ache working with him. He's so tall. Anyway, I toured the world with him, and we went to New Zealand, and we met Peter Jackson. And Peter Jackson invited me to his country house, which was for a weekend, and I knew then that I was auditioning in a way. I was being looked at for a part. So that was and then finally I had to do a screen test because Guillermo del Toro was going to be directing it, and of course he didn't know who I was, and so I did the screen test, and they showed it to him, and he said "sí," because he speaks Spanish. So I got the part, but then because of ridiculous money shenanigans in Hollywood, it put it off for a bit, and then he couldn't do it, and so Peter took over, and that was it really. I worked with him for 3 years. I had heard that he was a fan, not much, but I didn't because when I was there with King Lear, we went to his house in Wellington, and his children were there, and they were hoping he might arrive in my costume. Sadly for them, and he didn't, and wisely as well, really. Because 3 years later, at the end of our wonderful adventure together, he made a nice little speech, as he did with all the other actors, and he said, it's been great working with Sylvester, and he said, also, I got to work with Doctor Who! Now, for 3 years, he hadn't mentioned it. And if he'd have mentioned it earlier, I mean, the power, the kind of status between us would have been different. Because he was the boss, he was the director. But, I mean, if he was, a Doctor Who fan, then the status would have changed. So he was very wise not to bring it up.
Radagast was a character that was mentioned once in The Hobbit as like a sideline and never really brought up or really part of the novel. What was it like portraying a character that wasn't in the book, essentially? How do you feel that differed from Martin Freeman or Ian McKellen, who had source material to go by?
Well, in a way, there's a certain freedom in it, really. Because when I had read the book, it was a kind of a thing of passage you had to go through in the 60s, reading those books. And then I read them to my children, they were young, but I'd forgotten I thought the Hobbit, Radagast and the Hobbit. Anyway, when I got the part, I ran back and looked at the book and thought, there's not much of it, really. And Peter Jackson had said, it's a good job you didn't do Bilbo Baggins, because we've given you a bigger part, according to him. So, and I couldn't see this bigger part in the book. But anyway, so it meant I had a lot of freedom. And I'm an instinctive actor. I don't do research. I just put on the costume and something, and the wigs and all that kind of, and then, something happens. The bird poo, and that was it. I was away.
Do you have a favorite memory on the set of The Hobbit, or a favorite scene that you filmed?
Well, I suppose, yes. My favorite really was the opening of my character, where I was in this huge forest that they built in an aircraft hangar where they used to build airplanes, and they made a forest just for me, and I had a wonderful little house which was absolutely delightful, and it's a great shame they pulled it down, really, because it's so beautifully done. The details that the carpenters and designers put into it was just phenomenal. Anyway, I love doing those scenes, with a stuffed hedgehog. There was no other actors there, just me and this stuffed hedgehog. So I was absolutely over the moon. I thought, wow, I'm going to be in 3-dimensional, IMAX. Me and a stuffed hedgehog. Nobody else. They'll all be looking at me. And then I went to see the film, and of course the wizards of Weta got hold of the stuffed hedgehog, and they turned into this poor little creature, and it was all dying, and it was all sweet, and nobody was looking at me. They were looking at that bloody hedgehog. I wish I'd killed the damn thing. Upstaging little blackguard.
Switching over to Doctor Who for a few questions, do you still keep up with the show? Are you an avid fan? And if you do, what do you think of the future generations of Doctor Who?
You mean coming up future?
Well, I mean after you, like David Tennant, Christopher Eccleston, those guys.
21st century Doctor.
Yeah, the 21st century.
Which I'm a time traveler. I'm from the 20th century.
Of course.
So, well, I think they were great. I mean, Christopher Eccleston was brilliant. I thought he was terrific, and we have so much to thank him for because he brought it back to life with a vengeance, and that was glorious. And David was wonderful, and Matt. Funny enough, I saw this morning there was BBC America had Doctor Who on, and I just looked at it, and it was Matt, and he's really good, isn't he? He's really, really, really good. And of course Peter, is just glorious. So it's wonderful that they're great characters, and it's great in a way for superheroes, because normally superheroes, like guys that wear their underpants outside their trousers, and they got muscles, and they get in the way of thinking, those muscles. So it's great to have a character like Doctor Who where you can get very eccentric actors to play the roles, and that's just wonderful to watch, really, isn't it? So who knows what's next? Wow, how exciting. This Christmas we'll find out where it's going now.
Absolutely. There's a new generation coming up, regeneration coming up, so that's going to be exciting. I have a friend at home.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. I promised him I would ask this question because he's a massive fan of yours and a massive fan of Doctor Who. What do you imagine that the Blue Wizards look like?
Oh, you mean in The Hobbit?
Maybe in The Hobbit. I'm not sure.
Yeah, they are. I think the Blue Wizards were in The Hobbit. I think they might be blue.
That makes sense to me, yeah.
So it might be very sad.
Yeah, that would make sense.
Would fit in, and they maybe sing the blues.
That would be really cool. I'd see a movie on that. Yeah. And have you ever thought of writing a memoir on your experiences, either with The Hobbit or Doctor Who?
No, I was asked. I was commissioned once to write my autobiography, and I started it, and then thought, there's more to come. I had no idea how much more there was to come. This was quite a few years ago. So people keep saying I should write it, and I might get round to it one day. Yeah, I've got lots of tales to tell.
I think a lot of your fans would love to read it.
So. Well, we'll see. Yeah, I must get time. I think it's getting time to do it, really. Getting the time and the mental energy to go off and do it. I have to really go to a desert island and, think back. When I was doing my autobiography, though, all those years ago, I got to the age of 12. I'd trained to be a priest. I went to seminary, and they got you young in those days. They took you when you were 11, and I was 12, and I lived in the Highlands of Scotland. Although I was a Highlander, I didn't have a French accent, which is very strange. People who've seen the film would know what that was about. That's a subtle thing. Anyway, so I was a Highlander. I hadn't really seen much theatre, and I had no idea what an opera was. And I was taken to the opera from the college in Aberdeen. And years later, when I was thinking about that, a light bulb went on. I realised that 12-year-old fell in love with, the opera was La Bohème, and I fell in love with the bohemian lifestyle. And I'd been chasing a bohemian lifestyle ever since. And I had no idea until I was 56 or 58 when I started writing it. And I just thought, wow, the power of our industry, what it can do to imbue this 12-year-old, and sent me off on this journey trying to get to the left bank of Paris. Never quite made it. I made Belsize Park, which is the left bank of London.
Thank you so much for answering my questions and giving up some of your time for me. And this was amazing. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you. And this is That Movie Nerd and Sylvester McCoy signing off.
Bye.